Hey guys, so today you're going to be looking at the final aspect of area of study 2, which is perception of risk in the outdoors. So we have looked at this briefly in the area of study 1, but we're going to look at it in a bit more depth at the actual definitions for types of risk. I really like this quote, it's in your textbook as well. Only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far they will go. Just a beautiful way to start us off. So looking at these two images, in your mind or in your experience, which do you believe is riskier? Chat amongst yourselves. I can hear you screaming at the screen. And if you've said this one is riskier, I can understand why. Rock climbing can be a difficult sport, but in reality, there's a lot more control that you can have here. You've got ropes that are well set up. You don't go past your ability, and there's, there's a lot of safety equipment involved as well. Whereas driving a car, this one, I think it pretty much looks like an old combi van, so it's maybe a little bit more safe because you're not driving as fast, but you don't have control over what's around you on the road, and the conditions in which you're in can be quite difficult. Ice, things like that, and other drivers on the road, because of the speeds that you get up to. It can be quite a dangerous and risky activity. When we look at risk, it always involves the concept of comfort zones. And we'll be doing a few activities to help start stretching your comfort zones. I know how much you love that. But it's a really important part of outdoor ed and just life in general, because it does really help to become more confident, increase your self-worth, be more resilient, and be able to face the things that will come at you, because life is hard sometimes, and our ability to step outside our comfort zone can help us deal with that when it comes up. And just a quick note, when we're talking about risk, we're not talking about the type of risk that is unmanaged. We're talking about managed risk in which we can place controls while still maintaining the aspect of there being risk. Because when you take away the risk, we don't access this area of our brain which creates growth. If it's too easy for us, if there's no sense of challenge, then we don't grow, we don't push ourselves further. But we're not talking about things like drink driving or those risks that are sort of putting yourself physically in danger. There's a high level of risk. So, what is risk? You probably can't see this because of where my thingy is. Let me move that up for you. So, risk is the potential to lose something that you value measured against the possibility of gaining something that you value. That's the dictionary definition of what risk is. But when we look at it in terms of the outdoors, there's 3 categories. So, yeah, we can look at absolute risk and the worst case scenario, the uppermost limit of risk, where safety hasn't been considered, or so with this one here, when I first put it up, I thought he was free climbing, but now looking at it, he does actually have a rope. But if he didn't have a rope, if he was free climbing, then that would be an absolute risk, because if anything goes wrong, then he would fall. Base jumping could also be considered an absolute risk. But people still take those risks, because people who search for an adrenaline, often when they've been doing something for a really long time, then they need that next step, that next push. So they push for things like free climbing. And then we have perceived risk down here. So perceived risk is what we think the risk is within the activity. So if you think of someone who's terrified of heights trying to rock climb, their risk level is a lot higher than maybe someone who's a little bit more comfortable with heights and can see that the rope will catch you, the harness is there to grab. You've got someone on the base if you're top roping. You've got someone there to catch you. There's a lot of things in place to help save you so that you don't fall. Whereas a rock climber wouldn't have that comfort level, I guess. And these children here in the boats, they're potentially having a good time, but if one of them can't swim very well, then this would be quite a risky activity for them, where even though we understand that this canoe here is quite stable. And then the last one here is actual or real risk. Okay, so when we have considered the safety controls in an activity and we've managed them, or we've put in controls to manage the risk within the activity, but there is still risk involved. So if we look at mountain biking, there still is risk, even though we've got helmets, we've got PPE, we've got experience and training for depending on where we're going to, there still is the risk of falling off and hurting ourselves. It's always going to be part of the risk. So we will concentrate on perceived risk and actual risk because they are most relevant for us. We won't be partaking in any activities that are absolute risk. Okay. When we think about risk, there's this, I'm sure you've seen this before, is this concept of competence versus difficulty. So when we are very low competence, low skill level, and so if we're looking at this bit here, so skill level versus the perception of difficulty. So if we have a low perception of difficulty and a high level of experience, okay, we'd be bored in the activity. Okay. If we have a low skill level and a high, I wish it would stop doing that, sorry, and a high level of fear, then, or a high level of difficulty, perception of difficulty, then we'd be facing terror. This area here is what we're aiming for in all our activities. We want to hit this fine line between adventure and fear. Okay. And that's our peak experience. So the emotional reaction in the peak experience has a special flavour of wonder, of awe, of reverence, of humility and surrender before the experience as before something great. So Abraham Maslow was the pioneer of this concept of peak experience. And the peak experience is that moment when you stop and notice how amazing the experience that you're having is. Sometimes you don't even notice it till later, but it could be that moment when you reach the peak of a mountain and you're like, wow, I made it. Or when you were hiking along the trails and you get into camp, or you're trying to get up those hills, and it's like, and then you get around the corner and there's these beautiful cliffs that you get to witness and experience, and it's more beautiful because you've had to work for it. And it relates very closely. So a moment of incredible joy, they create lifelong memories. It's this line that we want to find. Okay? And it links very closely with this idea of flow. So we looked at flow previously in area of study 1, and often it relates because people who are experiencing peak experiences are in a state of flow. Okay. The activity that is linked with this you'll find on OneNote, and it's just a quick journal entry about detailing a moment when you have had a peak experience, and detailing when it was, why it was happening, and sort of what was happening during that experience for you. Okay. Have a good day and enjoy your Friday. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you next week.